Good Tuesday morning, friends. I wonder if you've noticed that language can be a funny thing. We create words to express ideas and then we assign meaning to these words. Our common language is intended to help us convey messages to each other. Indeed, it's how we communicate. But at times, we allow the meaning of words to change. I grew up in the 80s, and yes, I was too caught up in the craze that was Michael Jackson. You probably remember him. Among his many hits was the song Bad. Now, if we were to take our normal linguistic meaning and apply it to that title, we would infer that Michael is telling us that he's not a good person. While that may have proven to be true, that was not the point of the song. What Michael is saying is that he really is good, but tough. He has co-opted the meaning of the word and made it mean something pretty close to the opposite of what it used to mean. The same thing has happened with a lot of words in our language, and even our church lexicon is not immune to this trend. Take the word righteous, for example. Now, as we use it today, it means acting in an upright or moral way. By the way, it also has taken on a second meaning as absolutely wonderful or genuine, as Crush from the movie Finding Nemo tells us. That's totally righteous, man. All right, terrible. Sorry. But that's not the meaning I want to talk about. No, instead, the idea of being righteous has given way in much of our language to the idea of being self-righteous. That's a whole different thing. Self-righteous is defined as being confident in one's own righteousness, especially when smugly moralistic and intolerant of the opinions and behaviors of others. Well, that's quite a difference, isn't it? Righteous means acting in an upright way, while self-righteous is basically smug intolerance. We tend to confuse the two, but it's no wonder that we have such a strong reaction then when we hear the word righteous. Now, we find it actually in the Psalms, where the psalmist says, "Awesome things will you show us in your righteousness, O God of our salvation." So, which meaning do you think we're using when we say this? All right, that's an easy one. I think it's pretty clear that we are ascribing to God the true meaning of righteousness, that of acting in an upright and moral way. The same is true in Paul's letter to Timothy, where he says, "I've fought the good fight, I've finished the race, I've kept the faith. From now on, there is reserved for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will give me on that day, and not only to me, but to all who have longed for his appearing." Again, it seems pretty clear that what we're dealing with here is the upright and moral definition of the word. But Jesus, as he does sometimes, takes us in a different direction. In the gospel, we hear that Jesus told this parable to two men who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and regarded others with contempt. And he tells the story of the clearly self-righteous Pharisee who thought that he was better than others and had no pity for his fellow man. And Jesus shocks the listeners when he tells them that the sinner, not the Pharisee, went home justified. So even in the Bible, we find that the word righteous has two different meanings and that they can be diametrically opposed. Okay, so if you're still listening to the video at this point and I haven't put you to sleep, you're saying, how do we reconcile that? Well, I'd suggest actually a third way. You see, the word righteous is of course an English word, but it's taken from a much earlier English word that means right ways. One word, right ways. Right ways in early English meant living in right relations with one another. Let me say that again. Living in right relations with one another. Well, that certainly is different than the attitude of scornful contempt we hear about in the gospel, right? And I think that that's what we're supposed to take from it. Righteousness, my friends, is not about judging others. It is decidedly not about being smug and superior and looking down on anyone else. You've heard me talk before about the study that the church did. What do Christians think of themselves? We think that we're loving and kind and forgiving. What do non-Christians think about us? They think that we are intolerant and self-righteous. Youch. That's not what we want to be. So this smug idea that someone's better than someone else, that's self-righteousness, and that can't be what we're about. No, instead, I think we are reminded that righteousness is the idea of living in right relations with God and with one another. So how are we supposed to do that then? That's been a problem as far back as Cain and Abel. Well, the answer, of course, is found in the Bible and in the teachings of Jesus. In the Old Testament, God gives Moses the Ten Commandments, the laws that God sends to instruct us on how to relate to God and to one another. All right, let's just touch on those briefly. Love the Lord your God, honor your father and mother, do not steal, do not kill, do not covet, etc., etc. These are instructions on how we can live in right relations. Now, okay, you're sitting here saying, it's early, Rick, it's Tuesday morning, I may not have had enough coffee yet, so 10 might be too big a number for you to deal with. And if that's the case, well, Jesus has you covered on that one. Because when a lawyer asked Jesus, well, which of the commandments are the most important? Jesus distilled it down and said, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul and mind. This is the greatest and first commandment. And the second is like unto it, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Good old Jesus. He's taken the 10 and he's compacted them down to 2 for us. 2 instructions that help us live in right relations with God and with one another. Jesus also tells us to love one another as he loves us. So how do we love our neighbor as ourselves, as much as Jesus loves us? Well, again, we turn back to the teachings of Jesus. For Jesus, though he was indeed God incarnate, took on the role of a servant. He healed the sick, ate with outcasts, served the poor and the downtrodden. Jesus demonstrated this attitude of service in many ways, but the one I always find the most striking took place at the Last Supper. As they were gathering for the meal, Jesus wrapped a towel around his waist, knelt down and began to wash the feet of the disciples. Now, this was a startling thing. The lowest slave in any environment was the one relegated to washing the feet. It was the worst job you could imagine. And Jesus takes on that task. It could not have been a pleasant job. And yet Jesus assumed this role for the disciples. It's no wonder in that story that Peter was appalled. This happened a lot with Peter. He didn't get it at the time. He didn't understand the gesture, but we can look back and see that it was clearly yet another example from Jesus of how we are to live with one another, how we are to be in right relations with one another, how we are indeed to be righteous. Now, as a priest, I have pledged to live a life of service to God and to God's people. But I'm sure you already know that that is not the exclusive province of the clergy. Just because not today, but sometimes wear a collar and dress in funny clothes doesn't mean that clergy are all alone responsible for ministry. No. Do you realize that you too have pledged yourself to a life of service? In your baptismal vows, you pledged to seek and serve Christ in all persons, loving your neighbor as yourself. And that means, my friends, that we are all of us ministers in our common service to God and to one another. And that brings us back full circle to where we started, with the idea of being righteous. Paul tells Timothy that if we live moral and upright lives, if we fight the good fight and keep the faith, well, God will reward us with the crown of righteousness. And God tells us exactly how to do that, with the 10 Commandments, and most especially with the life and the teachings and the examples of Jesus. So let's make certain that we're using the correct interpretation of righteousness. Let's make certain that we avoid being self-righteous and focus instead on being right ways, in right relations with God and with one another. Amen.